Thank you, Teemu. So this is my topic, and this is a joint work with these people. So as Teemu said, so I started here like 1.5 months ago, and I have here with me a group of 5 people. So Emily Aukarinen and Andreas Henelius, they are doctoral postdocs, and then Rafael Savides and Anton Björklund are students, and I'm hiring. So this is mostly work done in my 2 academic projects, and also with these external collaborators. And you can, the first one is the main reference. So the structure of this talk is that I would start with introduction. I will try to give you a bit of the background, and then I will go more deeply to the topic that how can, with our methods, so how you can do human-guided data exploration, and maybe also explain what I mean by that. And then I will end with some future prospects or future ideas or things that we are currently working on. Okay. So first, this is kind of a generic background. From the methods viewpoint, so one of the main methodologies that I have been using for a long time and is randomization and simulation methods. So in randomization methods, the general idea is that instead of having some probabilistic model, we have some distribution over datasets, and then we can take samples from these datasets. And if you think about probabilistic data analysis or statistics, so this has many advantages. So first, it's often easier to get samples from the data than the sample from models. In physics or atmospheric sciences, for example, it's easy to make simulations of that produce datasets, but it's difficult to make models that explain the simulations. And also from the kind of the human interaction viewpoint, so it's often easier for a person to understand relations in data as opposed to relations in some very weird probabilistic model that somehow models the data. And now if we have this way of getting random samples from data from some distributions whose parameters we can control, so then we can do lots of interesting things. So we can obtain statistical significance for our data mining results, and this is something that we have been doing quite a lot. And nowadays it's very fashionable to interpret classifiers or explain classifiers. So one way of explaining classifiers is to feed them with data sets that have been broken in different ways and see how the classifier behaves. And this tells you something about how the classifier works, and this is also that we have been working on previously, even before this explaining classifiers was so fashionable. But I won't talk about that a lot. And then we can model users' knowledge, and then you have, of course, approximate Bayesian computation and approaches like that. And I think that one of the nice features of the randomization methods also is that, I mean, we can use efficient data mining algorithms like classifiers or pattern mining methods, and we can separate the statistical parts to this kind of the randomization or distributions over datasets. So I think that this is, I think one elegant way to bring probabilistics into this kind of algorithmic data analysis. Okay, but that was that is, I mean, just a background of the methodology that we have been using. And then if I move to the topic that what is the kind of the motivation of this work. So I guess that we have done lots of things with so-called substance area experts that actually know something about the data set that we are studying. And then what typically happens is that you make some PCA plot, you may make some clustering, or if you are more advanced, so you might use more advanced, and then you show some results to the expert, and the expert says that, okay, this is obvious, I already knew that. And then you go back and you try to find something else, and then you find some weird features, and it's kind of an ink block experiment that always you show the expert something, so he or she sees something, and this iteration takes typically a couple of weeks if you are working with doctoral students, so it's very slow. And this is, I mean, our actual experience, what happens. And then kind of now the motivation is to automate this process, that make this, instead of a 2-week cycle, make this like a 10-second cycle, that substance expert can actually him or herself do this iteration without this computer scientist. So the computer scientist is out of the work and can do something else maybe after that. So this is our ultimate objective. And okay, so just I mean, as an example, so I will be using this German election data as a case example. So not that I know anything about German election, but just because it's a nice data set. So this is a data set of the German elections at 2009, and it has about 400 districts, and for each district we have some voter demographics properties and voting results for different parties. And now it might be interesting for a political scientist or a journalist, for example, to explore the data and find some interesting features of this voting data. And this is, I mean, just a nice data set that has some classes, and the classes are that rural and urban, so the locations can be rural or urban, or then they can be at different regions. So there are more categorical variables there, but I just chose these to act as an examples. So this is kind of a real data with some class variables. And so now if you just start looking at it, so you do PCA, for example, and you look what it looks like that you got a big blob, and then you get this, all data sets have typically this one obvious feature, and for this data set, the feature that appears here, you always see this cluster, which is kind of the rural eastern region, so these are a bit different. And now there are, I mean, lots of interesting questions that, okay, for also that which patterns are real and which are random, and this is actually also one thing that we are working on, that how to kind of do this statistical testing from these kind of images. Okay, and then if you look at this cluster, so this is kind of these points are eastern and rural regions, and these are kind of such regions that have low population density, who don't vote for Green Party, and have low income and low workforce. So these are kind of and they vote for the left party a lot. So this is kind of a very kind of a distinct region. And now of course the question is that what next? That after you have got this most obvious feature, so what is kind of the principled way to continue from here? Okay, and now this was kind of a motivational introduction. I hope that everybody is now very motivated. So now that assume that now you have to give now build a system that would actually do something, show some next important feature. So then if you start thinking that what are the requirements for this your excellent data mining system that you want to provide for this political scientist. Obviously this system should know what you already know, because if the system has no clue what you know, so then it can't show you something that you don't know. So it's kind of obvious. And also it should know something that what you want to know, because many data sets are so complex that they of course have you don't know most of the things, and if you just show a person things that he or she doesn't know, so then it's quite a long process. It will take more than a couple of weeks for big genetics data, for example, I would imagine. And then of course because then it should be able to somehow show user informative views of the data. So it should have some sensible user interaction metaphor or some user interaction system, and here such views that somehow tell the user something that he is interested of and is something that he doesn't already know. And it should also be fast, so because we are going for this 10-second interaction cycle, so we can't do like 1 week sampling to get an optimal view. So these are kind of requirements, but then again, so because typically, I mean, in this kind of a setup, so typically we don't need to scale to millions of data items because it's often possible to downsample the data, at least unless you have network data or something that kind. But at least if you have this kind of tabular data, so it's typically possible to downsample the data and then work with that. So typically we don't need to scale for extremely big data sets, at least in terms of data items. And also the visualization sets limits, because I mean you can't visualize arbitrarily large data sets. Okay, so these are now the requirements, and now you can see that the three parts of the talk are that. So how do we model what the user already knows? And then how do we model how the user wants, and how do we show the most informative use? So there are many ways to do these things, but I will be going through one which I think is a very nice example from our recent paper that for which you saw the reference in the previous slide. So first, how do we model what the user knows? So as you might guess, so we used this randomization and distribution of the data sets to model the user's knowledge. And the idea here is that when the user knows nothing, so then the distribution of the data is as random as possible. But then when the user knows more, so then we can view this knowledge as constraints to this randomization. So for example, if the user knows that these two variables are correlated, so then we constrain the randomization so that the resulting randomizations maintain this correlation exactly or approximately. And then technically, so what I'm showing here example is constraint randomization, example of constraint randomization, but you can also do it with maximum entropy distribution. So it's one way to model, different way to model the random data sets or make distributions, and the third possibility is to use simulations, physical simulations, or if you have huge amounts of observations, so you can also use these as randomizations. But anyway, so there should be some way to produce random data sets with some constraints, and just some examples of these. So this is our ongoing work with that Anton is doing. So this is work with particle physicists. So we are using physics simulations to make these data sets, and then this is an example of these Mach-Ent models. But then what I'm kind of going through here is this constraint randomization. So usually this is a very hard problem. I mean, this is a very hard problem, but if you kind of formulate it very nicely, so then you can get it computationally very efficient. So in lots of our previous works, we had a very complex randomization schema that was very slow, and it's good if you want to do statistical testing or something. But if you don't want to do interactions, so then you want to have something fast. And basically, what we have here is a kind of a very weird version of permutation testing. So now if we go to this concrete example, so assume that you have a data as an Excel table. So most data sets can be presented as an Excel tables, and you have rows are data items and columns are attributes. And so now if you know nothing about the data, but we assume that let's say the user knows the marginal distributions of each variables, but nothing else. So the user doesn't know any correlations or any relations between the attributes. So then the simplest kind of way to have a distribution is that, okay, we have a distribution where each of the data set where the columns have been permuted in random are equally likely. So then we can sample from this distribution by permuting the columns uniformly in random. So when I'm talking about getting a random sample or random data set or distribution or having a distribution, so I basically kind of use them in a changeable way. And so this is, I mean, kind of and this is now the claim is that now this models the user's knowledge of this data when the user doesn't know anything about the inter-attribute relations whatsoever. And this is quite easy. and now you could compute some, let's say, some statistics based on this data, and this sample you would get quite a good estimate of these statistics from these random samples if at least if the data set is large enough. And okay, so this was kind of the unconstrained case. So now if so how can the user feed in information for the about the relations? So let's assume that now the user knows that these attributes 2, 3 or items, the attributes A, B, and C for data items 2, 3, and 4. So user has seen the relation. For example, user has seen plot of these attributes, and now the user kind of knows that what they are. So then the simplest way to model this is to use this so-called tile constraints, and the tile is a subset of columns and subset of rows. And now how do you sample using this? So now we sample such that we permute all columns in random, but now the rows within the tile we permute together. So if I take a couple of random samples, it looks like this. And now you can see what happens is that all other relations are broken, but now all, let's say, correlations and whatever patterns we have here, which they are kind of exactly preserved. And this is also very efficient because this is just doing permutations, so it doesn't take any time at all. And then actually I will show briefly later on, so we have actually a user interface where the user can kind of, if the user sees some patterns, so he can indicate with painting with mouse features that essentially then are mathematically expressed as these kind of tile constraints. So you also have these kind of a user interface kind of analog for this pattern. And then of course if the user has kind of typically you observe many patterns, but the nice thing here is that if you have overlapping tiles, so you can always have an equivalent presentation where the tiles are not overlapping. So these two presentations result to the same distribution, which means that you can always and you can sample from this very easily by just doing some permutations. So this is just for computational efficiency. Okay. So here is a kind of a very short, small toy example of how this works. That if we have this kind of a three-dimensional data set pictured here, and if we know nothing, so let's say that we permute and now the idea actually is that so these blacks are the data sets, and now these blue ones are now the permuted versions. And now the idea is that we want to show the user the view, for example, one of these views that in which is this data set and this background distribution, or this I call it as background distribution, this kind of our model of the user knowledge so differ most. So basically now the idea is that the view should be such in which these blue and black this background distribution of the data differ most. So it could be, for example, this screen, and if or it was this screen, and now if the user kind of has seen this x1 versus x2, and kind of if you set a tile constraint, so now here the kind of the data matches the background distribution exactly, and then the system would show the user next this view, and then the user could kind of make a tile constraint which would basically fix the relations between these attributes x1 and x3, and after fixing that, then the kind of the randomized data matches the actual data exactly. So which makes sense that basically if you have three attributes and you kind of fix two relations for the whole data, so then you actually have understood the data fully. So this was kind of the simplest example how this unguided exploration works, that you kind of show the user views that kind of in which the background information or this randomized model differs most from the actual data. And of course, in practice, you use a bit more advanced kind of projections and stuff like that, but this is the basic idea. And as an example from this German data, so if we now kind of have this observation of this rural eastern region, so we add this as a cluster, as a tile, and then we randomize again using this tile. So then we see some other features. That, I mean, what is the next most surprising thing if user already knows that, okay, I know about these rural Eastern European regions, so they are different. So the next view is some urban regions. So basically we find a big cluster of urban regions which have different demographics. So I mean, this is already alone quite efficient. That, I mean, this way you can, I mean, sequentially obtain, I mean, better and, I mean, views of the data that tell you something new about the data or something that you didn't already know. Okay, so this is, I mean, and now the kind of the tile here was rows were, I mean, these rural eastern regions, and then the attributes were the attributes in the tile where, I mean, these statistics were different from the whole data. So basically it was a tile of the part of the data. Okay, cool. Okay, the next part is that then modeling what the user wants. So the drawback of this previous approach was that I mean, if you have a big data set, so this is a very long process because, I mean, you sequentially show things that you don't already know, and then it would be nice to be able to somehow focus the search, and how we do that. And so basically how we do is that we on the one hand we model what the user already knows, which was the kind of the previous part, and then we want to show then we make a randomized version of the data such that the parts of the data that the user is not interested of are kind of blurred out. So then we don't actually compare the user's knowledge and the data, but the user's knowledge and the version of the data in which uninteresting parts have been blurred out. This is kind of very roughly the intuition. But I have not yet invented a very good way to kind of describe it in these kind of words, but I mean, this is what happens. So now if you compare this kind of this previous iteration that we wanted to compare this original data and randomized data and show view in which these two differ the most. So now if we kind of reformulate this a bit, so we can actually this original data is so if we add one big tile, it means that all of the rows are permuted together. So this is just a permutation of rows, which is null operation, at least if we assume that the rows are somehow interchangeable or the order doesn't matter. And then we can actually draw a tiling like that. That this just means that okay, now we just permute these columns together, and I mean, this is exactly the same thing as before, except that now here we might kind of permute the rows. But the point is that we can add these kind of greenish tiles here, and it doesn't actually change anything. But now the difference is that now we don't compare kind of the randomized data and original data, but we actually compare two distributions over data. And now instead of comparing, so now we want to find projections that show you maximal difference between two distributions defined in this kind of way. And now this was the kind of the what we did before, but now with this formulation you can actually do this kind of focusing to interesting areas. So for example, assume that we are only interested of parameters from 3 to 6 and attributes from A to D, and then we are interested only of the relation between this attribute block B to C and attribute A. So this could be that this, for example, this A would be some class variable, and we are interested of the features in this subset of attributes that are related to this class variable. So this is a variant of supervised PCA, for example. So we can kind of formulate different types of questions here. So and now this is now how we practically formulate these two hypotheses. And the idea here is that instead of now comparing dataset and randomized data, we compare two distributions which kind of model the user's knowledge and also blur out the parts of the data that are not interesting for the user, and only kind of only maintain the relation between, maintain kind of the only difference is the kind of the relations that the user actually is interested of, assuming that you can define these interests in these tiles or some other parameterization if you're using something else than tiles. So this is now the kind of the then you can so this is kind of the summary that now you can kind of and we call these tiles that define the user's kind of objectives as hypothesis tiles, and then we call these tiles that describe the background knowledge or user's knowledge as background tiles. And then what we can do is that we can just add these tiles together and now compare these two distributions and visualize the largest difference, and then we are kind of done. And here is, one more or less interesting example. Here we have another, again, a toy dataset. So the purpose of this toy dataset is to show that this leads to some non-trivial effects. That we have three attributes A, B, C, and D, and A and B, they are almost the same, plus very small random noise, and C is A plus bigger random noise, and D is B, this should be B plus some random noise. So basically there is this kind of underlying generative model of the data that we are unaware of. And now assume that the user is interested of knowing that what is the relation between parameters C and D. And without any background, so now if we plug in this, plug in everything, and we make this hypothesis 1, which is we make this hypothesis tiling, and hypothesis 1 is the data with non-interesting part blurred. So this is the blue one. So now only this interesting part, the correlation between C and D, is visible, and hypothesis 2 is the model of the user's knowledge, which is red. And now our result is that okay, if you want to know about relation between C and D, so then you should show a plot between C and D. So this was an extremely complex way of showing you the obvious thing that to show correlation of the two variables, so you should show plot between these variables. But now if the user actually knows that knows the relation between that this C is A plus noise and D is B plus noise, and this is encoded as tiles in the background knowledge. So then if we present the same question, so then actually the plot of A versus B is the most informative of the relation of the C and D. And this sounds kind of a bit unobvious first, because if you don't want to know about the relation between C and D, you should actually go outside these parameters. But then it makes sense because of this generative process, because the user didn't know that A and B are practically equal, and if he would know that, so then this would kind of explain the relation between the C and D. And again, this is a kind of a very simple example, but this kind of things happen also in the real data. And I think that this is a very neat example in a way that we didn't have to do any kind of logics here or semantics or anything, but just by using these constraints, we kind of utilize this kind of empirically this generative process of the data, and we get some unintuitive projection or view of the result that you wouldn't think first. And this also shows that what we are doing here, it is different than just subsetting the data. So we could have just have taken this subset of the data, looked at it, but actually if we know something else about the data, it might be that some other part of the data could be more informative. Okay. And now again, so here's an example of this German data. That we might be that okay that we want the user might be interested of the rural district and interaction of these three kind of classes of attributes, namely voting results, the several parties, democratic attributes, and workforce and education and attributes. So then if we define this hypothesis tiling based on that, so then we then we get some projection of the data, and then we can also add the kind of the background information that we used before, which was this tile with rural eastern regions, and then we have a kind of a different output there, which may or may not be useful for the substance area expert. So I won't go to these into more detail now, so there is no time. But then the question is that, how do you do this interaction, and how do you, interface with the user? So one of the basic things here is to show one of the kind of the way to approach this is that now that we have, remember that now that we are comparing two distributions, and then we want to somehow show you the maximal difference between two distributions, and this is actually a different objective that is targeted by most dimensional reduction methods, because most dimensional reduction methods is that you take a data and you have some cost function and you want to show you some part of the data, but actually I'm not aware of the dimensional reduction methods that would kind of directly want to show you the differences between two distributions. I guess that there might exist different contexts, but anyway, so the one very straightforward way to do that, or let's say that is as follows. So now if we have this kind of this randomization schema, so then we can actually even analytically compute covariance matrices for these two distributions that we are comparing, and then we can define some sort of a cost function that maximizes the difference between these two distributions. And let's say that if you think PCA is good, so then an obvious choice could be, for example, that okay, find a direction where the variances of the two distributions differ most, and this is what this cost function is looking for. And let's say that okay, this is the projection direction that I want to go for. And actually we can show that if you do it this way, and if you have no background information, so then this dimensional reduction reduces the PCA. So this is actually PCA is a special case of this method. But you can also have other types of cost functions here, obviously, but I mean, this is, I will go through this because this is the simplest, and it's nice because it kind of reduces the PCA at this limit when we have no background tiling and we have most general objectives. And now if we take this German data, that examples that so these are the plots that I showed you before, and now we have so here we actually have of course two kind of two projections, because we have XY plot, but this is just an orthogonal to the first one. So then so here are the different projections. So the first projection axis, and this plot is for without any background information. And this is with the background information that we know this, show me something different than these rural eastern districts. And then these two are the plots with the focus, with this kind of focus tiles, or with this kind of human-guided exploration hypothesis tiling. And now if we compute this cost function that was in the previous slide, so the ratio of the variances basically, so we notice that when we optimize this, so we can do this spectrally, so it's a convex problem. So then, I mean, of course, I mean all of these views, so which we have, so they maximize this cost function. And for comparison, so if we did PCA or ICA, so I have also written down the costs there. So we notice that okay, PCA is the same as our method at the limit of no background information and most general kind of hypothesis. But in other cases, so at least in terms of this measure, so we get kind of better results because, well, it is something that we are optimizing. But this also shows that the informativeness of these views really differs. So it's not kind of enough just to use PCA or some other of your favorite method, but it's nice that I mean it matters that if you kind of do this thing. Okay, so I think that it was kind of the third component, and then if I go to future prospects, so we have some. Just first to mention that we have some demonstration, some software releases which kind of are not really kind of production quality systems, but which actually work and you can run on your laptop, and these kind of can be used to test these kind of concepts, that how does this kind of interaction work. And this is one of these methods, this CIDR, that actually uses maximum entropy system inside, but is otherwise kind of quite similar. And so you can take a look at those if you want. And then I guess that then if I move to this conclusion part, that I think that if you are doing kind of this human interactive data exploration or human-guided data exploration, so I think that these randomization methods are quite useful, because it's kind of possible to model the user's knowledge as a distribution of the data set, so it seems to work in practice. And it's also kind of usually it's relatively easy for a person to define these constraints in the terms of the data. So then these user-defined constraints, so then they transform to some mathematical presentation in the computer algorithm. And I think that it has many advantages as compared to some other approaches. And this also kind of gives you a kind of a principled and sometimes even information theoretical way for this exploration, in terms of that we show the user kind of maximally informative views of the data. And sometimes you can argue and prove about that. And then, then I listed some of the possible future work, and some of this work we already have been doing. So what are the directions? So I was talking about just tabular data, but like Anton is working with the particle physics simulations, and I will probably be working with atmospheric data for some reason in the near future. So there are also interesting problems there. So and also if you want to use time series and geospatial data, so that's interesting thing. And also this interaction part is actually quite non-trivial to make it work intuitively. So we have tested this with our colleagues and substance area experts, and it works surprisingly well, and they can actually utilize them. But in order for these methods to be really useful for, let's say, larger audience, so this requires some very serious human-computer interaction work. And one interesting research direction is also the statistical properties and statistical robustness of our results, because now we have a sampling method, so it's kind of an obvious kind of to say that, okay, can you do some statistical significance testing or confidence intervals, and what kind of statistical guarantees you can give. And this is something that we have been doing before, and also actually one of the topics that we are kind of currently working on. And also one topic is how can we explore and explain classifiers. So especially for example in physics and in this atmospheric science schema, so we do not just explore the data, but we actually have some classifier which, for example, tries to predict values of some atmospheric measurements, or we might have a classifier that tries to predict whether it is a quark or gluon jet, and we also kind of want to integrate understand this classifier at the same time. So it's there is some. I think it's a very interesting topic. Okay, but I think that my time is almost up. So I thank you for your time.
Questions? In there?
So I'm wondering about the definition of background knowledge. So you define background knowledge as a tile. I don't quite get how this works. So like, you have to, if an expert has background knowledge, then you have to relate background knowledge to particular instances in data, right?
Yes.
So like, what if experts rather have generic background knowledge for the whole data, like a relationship, like for example, income is high and credit risk is low. So does this work the same way?
So just to give a long answer to a brief question. So I think that I mean, you can of course give this kind of a background information that, I mean, you use the restriction that, I mean, that some variable is always or almost always higher than something else. But I mean, in our work, so what we have been doing, so we have been always started from the scratch. That the user background knowledge is always this kind of a very random thing. And then what the user has been doing is that then he or she has been, with this user interface, has been basically painting these patterns that he or she has observed, and if these are understandable, so then has marked them to a background knowledge. But it would actually, it's one of the topics that, I mean, if these methods should be useful, so I mean, one of the future research topics is that how do you encode this kind of a generic background information, and also information that, I mean, at one session you kind of observe some relations, so maybe you want to save them and share them with your colleagues. So this is, I mean one of the things that could be done. So I mean, there are several domains, like for example, if you are doing some credit analysis on some bank transactions, so it's pretty nice if you could save this information as rules, for example, but we haven't done that yet.
So is this more like the main expert approves your instances, so looks at particular instances and then says, okay, this relationship makes sense in this particular instance?
Yes, that's a limitation of our current implementation, but not a principled limitation of the method.
I think where those cluster labels came from in the first two German voting examples that you showed, the yellow ones. So where did the yellow label come from?
Okay.
It was far from obvious that there will actually be such a cluster, especially the second one.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean. Of course, this now what we use is the label from the data, but I guess that our argument here is that now if you have an expert user who is looking at this plot without this yellow labeling, so there are of course, I mean, many possible clusters, but I mean this is the cluster that kind of matches with the data, and hypothetically also would match the, okay, that the political scientist would know that, okay, these eastern rural regions, they are different.
So the thought was, if there actually was clearly separated cluster, then
yes, yeah.
Especially the second one, I would, if the yellow wasn't there, I wouldn't recognize it as a cluster.
Yeah.
So a follow-up question to this: what happens when there is a label like yellow or whatever, rural, but in your visualization it kind of overlaps slightly? What happens? Can the user still say that this is the cluster that I'm not interested in, or I am interested in, or not?
Yes, so
in both of your German data examples there was some kind of clearly dividing line.
Yeah.
There's not.
Yeah, I mean usually, of course, I mean in practical cases the clusters are not clearly separated as we know. If they would be, so everything. So I think this is a different data set and a different kind of, but I mean a very typical case is that, I mean, you have here you have, let's say, some clusters here, and this is, I mean, one cluster, and this is one cluster, and this is actually a mixed cluster, and so you don't see it, but there are, I mean, two kind of and I guess that I mean there are, I mean, several ways to do this. Either you can mark these clusters as you see visually, and then it's an interesting question to whether this is a random artifact or not, but I mean not the topic of this talk. And then you can see that, okay, what is the composition of this cluster, and you can, I mean, mark this as a background knowledge, even it's not, let's say, pure cluster. So it still kind of works. I mean, if there are some, let's say, contamination, it doesn't matter. Or then you can say that, okay, this is mostly from 95% from this class. So then you might say that, okay, let me just delete this and then mark these points that are 100% in this cluster, and it's kind of up to the user in practice to do this exploration. But in practice, I mean, how this kind of goes is that So if I just tell us this kind of so there was this brain hack event that we participated with actually with this tool, and the idea there was that we had a data set of some brain imaging results, and you had depressed people and controls, and then you make this first kind of a plot. So there was like 1/3 of the points were like here, and the rest were there. And then when we kind of painted this one, so then it was scanner 1. There are 3 scanners, and calibration of the scanner 1 was kind of a bit off. So basically, most obvious feature of this data was this calibration error. And then it was kind of quite easy to, let's say, mark that, okay, this is this scanner 1, and click it, and after that, it's kind of the effect of that was eliminated immediately. So it's kind of then what happens that in a way that it's, I think, more intuitive when you use it than to kind of and it is actually a very typical thing what happens with the data cleaning is very kind of difficult because you have all types of weird features, and this type of approach seems to be very efficient in capturing and going through all of these different weird features.
Okay, now we're actually out of time, so further questions better be directed straight to Kai. Thanks.